And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and today we're taking a look at Bitoku, which is one of the hottest Euro-style games that come out this year. It's a big, grandiose game, and it was a little surprising to me that it came from Devir. Not that Devir hasn't made really strong games. I mean, their Red Cathedral is really getting a lot of buzz right now, but this game certainly got a lot of buzz. It's a game about Japanese spirits and collecting these spirits, and I gotta be honest, folks, there's a lot of different names they use for all these different pieces, and I'm not going to be mentioning many of those because I don't quite grasp what the theme is going on, because the game is essentially themeless. This is a point salad game where you're going to be doing a lot of different actions to get points in various ways. And while it's a big, grandiose game and many things and different moving pieces, I don't think it's awfully difficult to understand and teach, although I'm a little daunted here giving you kind of an overview of it, but let's try it. Folks, there is a lot going on in Bitoku, and so I'm not going to go over everything, but I'd like to give you somewhat of an idea of how the game plays. This is a player board at the beginning of the game. Everyone's player board is the same, except you have a random rock that's placed here. This is a way that you'll be scoring points at the end of the game. You have pilgrims here. 3 of them are awake, the rest of them are asleep. And as the game goes by, one of the actions that you can get is getting these crystals, which you'll put on the board in different spots, and then that will awake a pilgrim, and you have a chance to use that pilgrim. You can place these crystals like up here, and then you have more pilgrims. These pilgrims are going to be used to be placed in different areas. One of them is on your own board itself, where as these pilgrims are connected to different rocks, the rock will score you points based on a number of pilgrims that are connected to it. And so pilgrims are going to be used in that regard. The Bitoku themselves, the name of the game, are cards. Each player has the exact same starting hand of cards, but you can get more cards from a deck as the game goes by. These cards are slightly better than the cards that you have. When you, on your turn, players have 3 different kind of actions that they can take. One of those actions is playing a card from their hand. And so I want to be clear, you have a deck of 5 cards at the beginning. You'll draw 4 of those into your hand, and you'll add more cards to your deck and use, you have a hand of 4 cards each round, but you're going to be able to play 3 of those cards. You can pick one of these spots to play that card to. It's going to do a few things for you. It's going to give you the action on the card. So this one here, I could buy a dragonfly with the action, for example. It also is going to unlock the die there. Players have 3 dice. All these dice start to each round locked. You can't place a die onto the board till it's unlocked. So when you place a card there, it unlocks the die. There are other abilities that unlock a die. For example, up here, this tile that I got at the beginning of every round is going to unlock a die for me. And you might want to do that because that way you can place the die on the board before you play the card. But you will get your dice eventually because you will place these cards and unlock the dice. So playing a card gives you the actions on the card. If you put one of these pink crystals next to it, you also get that action. So here I would also get a sake along with whatever action is on the card. So that's one of the 3 actions that you can play, and like I said, actions will get better. So this one, for example, gives 2 actions as opposed to the single action that the original Kappa gives you. At the end of every round, players are allowed to basically take one of these cards and tuck it under the board up here where it will score victory points at the end of the game. And all your initial cards are worth 3 victory points, while the other cards that you get can have a maximum of 12 victory points and usually give you victory points for various things that you've collected over the course of the game. Now that's one of the actions that you can take. Another action is to take one of your unlocked dice and place it on the board. Now before I talk about where dice go on the board, I want to talk a little bit about the board itself. So this is the board in all of its glory, although I don't have all the pieces on the board just because there's a lot of moving parts here. We're going to take a look at different parts on this board. But at the top of the board, you're going to keep track of the number of rounds in the game, and you're also going to keep track of the different seasons in each round, although the seasons are kind of basically spring, autumn, and winter are essentially get ready for the round, close down from the round. Summer's where all the actions that players are taking. It's 90% of the game. That's what we're talking about. Up here, you have a spot where your people are going to be, you're going to be sending your pilgrims up here. They're going to be moving down these different paths and stopping at different spots to get you victory points as the game goes by. And these different spots will have different tokens in them that are going to be worth various bonus points. Here is where cards are going to be placed that you can add to your deck and add path cards. There's where the dice get placed, and buildings, and then more down here. You can see there's just a whole lot going on in this board. But I wanted to talk briefly about placing dice, so let's take a look at that. When placing dice, you're going to place them on this side of the river, and the number of pips on the die are going to matter quite a bit. In fact, you cannot go to a spot unless you are equal to or higher than the other dice that are there. The game does come with resources you can use when you're placing dice to add to those dice. So when I place this 3, I might change it and turn it into a 5. When you go to a spot, you are going to get an action at that spot based on the value of the die. And you can pick any spot or lower than the value of your die. And that only matters here because underneath each of these areas, there's sort of a spot here where you're going to be moving a token down this track, and at the end of the game, whoever's the farthest on each of these tracks is going to score points based on the tile that's there. So when you go here, for example, the 5 goes here, this gives resources. So I could move 1 on the track if I want to, or I could take a jade or a wood. If I'm a 2, if I'm a 3, I could take a resource of my choice. And if I have a 4 or 5, I get 2 resources of my choice. And if I'm a 6, I get 3 resources of my choice. So that's that section over here. And then you can build buildings and get crystals. Remember those crystals that you place in the board? You can buy those to put on your board, or you can build buildings. We'll come back to that. Over here in this area, this lets you move your pilgrims on that path I showed you earlier. And then down here, you get dragonfly tokens and other tokens. So this is the first thing you'll do. You place that there. Now, one of the actions allows you to build buildings. And when a player builds a building, they're going to place it in the corresponding type. So you can see this is a red building. So this red building would go on one of the red spots there. When you build a building, you're going to pay the costs on your player board, which are printed below each of the things. So I would take this off, for example, paying 1 wood. That's going to score me 2 points at the end of the game, and I'm going to put that marker on the building to show it's mine. When a player goes to a spot where there's a building, they get to use one of the buildings that's there as long as their die meets the requirements. So this particular building only needs a die that's 1 or higher, while this building here requires a die that's 5 or higher to use it. It's going to give you something. This one here lets you unlock one of your dice. And if you use someone else's building, they get the bonus here, in which case that person simply is going to score a victory point. So when you're placing these dice, you get to use the ability here, or you get to use a building. Now there's also a spot in the very middle where you can place a die and the value doesn't matter. This is mostly going to give you the tokens that allow you to increase your dice, and also the highest die in this section will affect turn order from round to round. The third action that you can take on your turn, so you can play a card in front of you, you can place a die, you can also have your dice cross the river. So the dice get placed on this side of the river, you simply go across the river to the other side. Whenever you cross the river, your die goes down by 1, which means a die of value 1 cannot cross the river. The only exception of this is a die of value 6 goes down by 3 to a 3 when it crosses the river. And these are going to maintain their numbers. So when you put them back on your board, you're going to maintain that. So your dice are constantly going down, and you're going to have to use these tokens to bring them back up. When you cross river, there are 3 actions that you can take, and as each action is taken, no one else can take that action. So the first person to cross has a choice. One of the actions is to take 2 different smaller actions here. And then the other 2 actions are to take one of the 2 cards at the location. This is how you get more cards into your deck. The card goes right to your hand. You could even use it that turn if you want. These cards come to a path that's in front of you where you'll be moving a token that you have. The cards are placed next to your player board, and as you get movement, you can move across these, which will give you victory points and other bonuses as you move down here. This is a good way to get a lot of victory points. Other things that can happen is you can get more rocks and add those rocks to your area. I mentioned buildings and crystals. The purple crystals you get at the beginning of every round. Whatever's up here you'll get. The pink ones happen when you put a card there, and the yellow ones happen whenever you take that action. This one says whenever I get a crystal, I get 2 points. You're also going to be collecting spirit tokens, which will give you the bonus on them. So this lets me move 1 on a track or take a token that adds 1 to a die. And dragonfly tokens, which don't do anything initially, but as you collect them, you place them on your board, and whenever you, let's say I had a dragonfly token, and then I get a spirit token, or the other way around, I can immediately connect them, which then activates the dragonfly. In this case, I get one that lets me add 3 to a die. And I put these next to the board because some victory conditions might matter for them. And in fact, there are cards that players will have that at the end of the game will score you points. You lose 2 points if you don't fulfill them, but at the end of the game, if I have 1 building and 1 spirit and 1 path card, and then you can't use the same thing for another card. So if I have 2 cards, I would need 2 buildings here, and I would need to have 1 of my pilgrims in that space, and then I would need to have 2 of these. So if you have these at the end of the game, you're just going to score victory points. And that's pretty much it. There's a whole lot going on, but it all comes down to these 4 different areas that you're going to place dice into, then cross the river to take the same kind of actions, putting houses down here, which will make your actions better, then taking the various buildings and rocks and such. At the end of the game, there's a bunch of different endgame point scoring, including whoever's the farthest on each of the different tracks on the board, and whoever has the most is the winner. Now this game is gorgeous. My one complaint, and I'll say that right now, is that once again, this beautiful board, I wish they had made it like 50% lighter so that you could more easily see everything on the board. But wow, so many components in the game. So we have different resources. The wood, maybe it's my second complaint. I don't like how the wood resources look. I might upgrade them. You got wood, jade. My favorite resource, the sake, looks really good. They give you these 3+ and 5 times tokens, but I don't know that we've ever needed those, even with a full 4-player game. And I just find it odd that they put those in because you spend resources so quickly in this game. There's no reason to hoard them. Now, there's this board itself. It's a very big board. There's 3 boards. There's a 2-player, a 3-player, and a 4-player. For the 4-player, this board is a dual-layered board. So you can see this is the 4-player side, and then I would flip it over for the 3-player side. So all these different sections flip over for a 3-player side. I was showing you the 4-player side. So that's kind of cool, and when they're in, you don't really notice them. I really like the tokens on your player board. They're all, the pilgrims there are screen printed, which is cool. And the artwork on all the different spirits in the game is really fun. It definitely has kind of a Studio Ghibli style to it, I feel. And it just, everything, the game just looks gorgeous. Other than, the fact that setting it up is going to take a while and everything, I really like the components. I want to first talk about game length. I think that this is a fairly involved game, and I wonder that I might not ever again play it with 4. Maybe I would, but I would want no one there to have analysis paralysis, because analysis paralysis in this game is pretty strong. Some turns are pretty fast. When you play a card from your hand, you play the card, unlock the die, do it. When you're putting a die on the board, though, let's say your die lets you build a building. Now you have to decide which of the available buildings you're going to buy. Or take a dragonfly, which dragonfly are you going to take? And underneath the buildings and the dragonflies and things, sometimes it will say cost 1 less resource or cost an extra resource to do these things. So all that's into account. You have to decide where you're going to place it. So someone who could be frozen by a lot of decisions, this would be a tougher game for them, or more importantly, maybe for their opponents. That being said, it does feel like you have about, at maximum, 9 actions. You can play 3 cards, place 3 dice, move all 3 dice across the river. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you'll place a die in the middle of the board where there is no river to cross. Sometimes you'll place a 1 die who cannot cross the river. Sometimes you can't place a die in a spot because the dice there are too high. And sometimes the river, 3 people have already crossed across it and there's no more spots for you to go to. But I would say you have on average 7 to 8 actions per turn. And sometimes you get all 9. That's a lot, and then there's 4 turns over the game, so about 30-some turns that you're going to have. And each of those turns can involve other things. If, for example, I go somewhere and it gives me 3 movement, then I have to decide how am I going to move my pilgrims. I'll move the pilgrim up here 2, move my token on the board here 1. If I'm going to build, when I go to a spot to take an action, if there's a building there, which building am I going to use? And as the game goes on, the options increase. You have more things, and also you get benefits. When I do this, something else will happen. The Bitoku cards that you play become better. Now, in all of that, I guess the question is there enjoyment? Okay, so we know one thing, there's a lot going on. I think so because I think the game, I should say I think so, I do enjoy the game, but I think that this game is fairly straightforward. There's very few things in this game that I have to wrap my mind around. The trickiest thing was the unlocking of dice, because you play a card that unlocks a die. I'm like, well, then why do I care about all these powers that unlock dice? And it's because, hey, sometimes you want to put dice on the board as quickly as you can. Playing the card, no one can stop you from doing that, but dice, you can be stopped at. Once you get over that, though, everything else is kind of falls in place. Now, this does mean that there's very little here that's new. The unlocking the dice is pretty much the main aspect. We have a very tiny bit of deck building. We've seen that before. You're fighting on these tracks to see who gets the farthest. We've seen that. There's pilgrim tracks where you move, and the farther you move, you can get more points, or you can go ahead and get early points. We've seen that before. There's dice, and when you place them, you can't place it unless your die is equal to or higher than other dice. I've seen that. Now, what makes this game different than others, like I said, is the locking and unlocking, and the fact that they've mixed all this together. It does feel in many ways that they put a bunch of mechanisms in the box, shook it up, and lo and behold, here's this game. That's not a knock against this game, but don't jump into this if you're like, wow, this is the thing that really brings it out. That makes it different than other games. What this game, the number one defining thing about this game, honestly, is going to be how it looks. I mean, it looks amazing. So that's going to attract people. After looking at so many brown Euro games, this one stands out. So that's one thing that's going to make it stand above and beyond everything else. The other is that even though I said it looks like they threw a bunch of mechanisms and put them together, they do work together. And because these stacks of dragonflies and spirits and buildings and crystals is going to come out in a different order, you are constantly kind of stretching and moving and saying, okay, I wasn't going to buy a building, but that building seems like a lot of people would use it. Maybe I should. And then there's even the rocks. The rocks at the beginning, you're like, wow, this sounds like it could get me a lot of points. It doesn't. And in fact, there's nothing in the game that seems like it's tons of points. It's lots of little ways to get various points. And I think that's going to encourage people who like to get points in different ways. Hence why I called it a point salad game. Now, so far in the games I've played, it's been a very big spread of points. I haven't seen necessarily close games because you can get better, I think, and pull ahead of everyone a little bit. I'm not sure, though. I wouldn't call myself an experienced gamer at Bitoku. But that being said, it's a game I like to go back to. It's not a game that I'm like in love with right now. I like it a lot. I mean, I really think it's good. I'm entranced by it. There's a lot of cool things. And I've even as I did this review, I thought, this is how I'm going to play next time I do it. This is what I'm going to do in my first action if possible. And that sort of thing is a good sign for a game. I also can see that a lot of people are going to really enjoy this. We haven't had big, crunchier Euros like this for a while. There are a few come out each year. This year, a lot of them have come out. This one's standing above in the pack, I think, because it just looks gorgeous. And let's not kid ourselves. That definitely accounts for some of it. But also, it does mix everything together. You like deck building? There's a little bit of that in here. You like dice placement? There's a little bit of that in there. You like actions that change? Going here, now there's a building, so it changes the action. That's something I like a lot. That's in here. And it's done so in, I think, a fairly seamless way. So check it out. It's a lot of fun. And some of you out there, I know this is going to be like a 10 out of 10 for you. For me, it's not quite at that point, but it's one that I think is fun to play. So that's Bitoku. I'm Tom Vasel. We'll see you next time. Dice Tower Judgment approved.